Next up, and we do have a hard stop at 12:30, distribution. We have Superintendent Mike Hanlon all the way from Chardon, and Jared Bunting coming to us from Trimble, Athens County, and Mike Sobel, Treasurer at Granville. Gentlemen. And committee members, if you refresh your iPads, the presentation will be available now.
Co-Chairman Cupp and Patterson and distinguished members of the House Finance Subcommittee on Primary and Secondary Education. My name is Michael Hanlon. I am the superintendent of the Chardon Local School District located in Geauga County. And joining me today are my colleagues Jared Bunting, Chief Finance Officer of the Trimble Local Schools of Athens County, as well as Mike Sobel, Chief Finance Officer of the Granville Exempted Village Schools. Mr. Bunting and I served as co-chairpersons of the Distribution Subcommittee of the Cupp-Patterson School Funding Work Group. Our testimony today is offered in support of the proposed fair funding plan for Ohio schools developed over a 15-month period of time by a dedicated group of legislators, school leaders, education finance experts, and consultants. Specifically, we will focus on the proposed model of distribution of funds to each of Ohio's school districts. The first portion of our presentation will focus on the current model used to distribute funds to school districts. Mr. Bunting will provide an overview of what the committee believes is a more rational, understandable, and more effective method of accomplishing this objective. Mr. Sobel will then provide information concerning district data gathered from initial simulations of the proposed distribution mechanism. The Distribution Committee focused its efforts on evaluating Ohio's current method of dispersing funds appropriated by the Ohio Legislature to each of Ohio's 610 public school districts. There are clear, undeniable differences among these school districts, including relative property wealth, income factors, needs within distinct student populations, physical geography, and many other factors that impact the need of a school district in order to effectively educate their students. While the method currently employed to determine how available funds should be allocated to each district attempts to take into account relative capacity to generate local revenue, the result is a methodology that is cumbersome and fails to provide a rational, understandable, and predictable result, and fails in providing school leaders and fiscal officers the information necessary to make effective planning and management decisions for their school districts. In fact, very few school officials fully understand the current distribution model and are therefore ill-equipped to make the necessary forecasting and management decisions demanded of them by the legislature and their local communities. In addition, the number of school districts that fall either into cap or guarantee status provides further evidence that the current distribution model is ineffective at best. We will not use today's time to detail the current funding distribution model. However, within the testimony and the following slides, a basic overview is provided for the members of the subcommittee. By way of simplified background, Revised Code 3317.017 provides a methodology for the current state share index calculation as follows. First, within a district, there is a calculation completed to determine the district's valuation index. The next calculation looks at the district's median income index. The next calculation will then evaluate the district's income index, which equals a fairly complicated sum and calculation that you see on the screen. You can understand why I'm moving quickly through this. It's out of fear that I'll not get this correct, and I'm pretty confident that that would happen. Next, there would be a determination of the school district's wealth index, and finally, the computation of the district's state share index as an interaction of all of those factors that have been computed. This approach to the distribution of state funding to school districts attempts to adjust or level the state share of funding for relative income and property valuation levels among school districts in an effort to achieve an equitable level of state support. However, there are definite shortcomings within this approach. Consider volatility. The current SSI is not updated annually, but rather every 2 years with each new biennium, leading to fluctuations in funding to each school district. Instability. A district's funding levels can be impacted by changes in statewide averages. Districts are not compared to themselves for funding determinations. The approach is overly dependent on property valuation. Under the current distribution mechanism, between 60 and 100% of local funding sharing is derived from local property valuation, while 0 to 40% is determined by income levels. Inconsistency. The model produces inconsistent results based on sometimes unintended interactions between property valuation and income. Mr. Sobel is best equipped to speak to those issues should you require more information. The current methodology simply doesn't work. Only 18% of Ohio school districts receive funding as calculated by the formula. The remaining districts are either on a cap or guarantee. In an era of stringent fiscal accountability, where school officials and boards of education are required to prepare five-year forecast projections and accurately reflect the financial standing of a school district, the existing distribution model does little to support accurate financial modeling beyond the current biennium. At this time, Mr. Bunting will now outline our recommendations for the distribution under the fair funding model.
Thank you, Michael. Co-Chairman Cupp, Patterson, fellow members of the House Finance Subcommittee on Primary and Secondary Education, I would first like to begin by thanking you for allowing me to provide my first testimony before any committee in support of the Fair School Funding Plan. As we explained earlier, my name is Jared Bunting, and I am the Chief Finance Officer of Trimble Local Schools in Athens County. The slide that you have before you right now was provided to give some clarity that it took 6 slides of the same format to cover briefly the state share index. This one slide covers what we are proposing. So we're not trying, our charge was to come up with something that was understandable, transparent, and rational, and it doesn't have to be overly complicated to meet those requirements. Under the proposed fair funding model, the Distribution Committee is recommending an approach that continues to recognize the contributions of local property valuation and income capacity in determining the level of state share support for a given school district using relative weighting of 60% on property valuation and 40% on income capacity. The model proposes the following methodology. As you can see on this slide, there are 2 portions to income that are split 50-50 or 20% and 20% to come up with the 40%. First, we have to determine the valuation per pupil of a school district. There are a couple examples here of similar districts in size with a difference in valuation. And as you can see, the total amount of valuation per share is approximately $1,000 difference, even though the districts are very similar in size. Next, we have to calculate the income capacity of each district. We have a federally adjusted gross income weight and a median federally adjusted gross income weight that goes into this calculation. Once all these factors are calculated, they are simply added together to come up with a total per pupil local share, which would then be deducted off of the base cost amount that would be assigned to each district individually. Now let's take a minute to discuss some of the rationale behind why this methodology is being proposed. Schools can generate revenue in 2 major ways: property taxes and income taxes. This distribution method takes into account both sources equally across all districts. All districts are calculated the same way, using residents' income and each district's property value to determine funding capacity. The result will no longer change unless there's a change in the district's own valuation or income. Each district is calculated independently of statewide averages, resulting in an increased stability in funding levels and eliminating the current concern where a change in one district impacts another. In addition, this provides a clearer picture of each district's local funding capacity. The new calculation accounts for demographic changes in districts due to the fact that it is based on a K-12 enrollment calculation. The K-12 headcount calculation also benefits changes to the open enrollment funding, which was discussed earlier today. By recalculating annually, this causes less dislocation by having smaller, more frequent changes instead of having one large change each biennium. As a district that receives most of its funding from the state of Ohio at Trimble, our current state share index is 88.9%. The distribution model is, to say the least, very important to my home district. The current formula as it is today has been working for my district with the recent addition of capacity aid. That is not to say that there is no concern at Trimble right now. With the patchwork of funding that we have in place currently, there is nothing that says that a legislature or General Assembly can come in and change either the patch itself or the size of the patch. And when we're being funded at 88.9% from the state of Ohio, any change to any of these patches could greatly impact my home district. And we have worked hard over the last couple decades, first being in fiscal emergency to climbing out and now being fiscally solvent, that we don't want to take the chance of going back to the beginning of the century. The new base cost and distribution methodology will allow for increased stability. That is one reason why, even though once simulations are released, there's not a great impact to my home district. That is because, as I discussed earlier, some of the patchwork has helped Trimble. But the increased stability is worth not being one of the districts at the very top of the increase from a new funding model. This will allow myself, the board, the superintendent to provide better projections and future planning, which will also help prevent us from moving backwards into the early 2000s when we were in fiscal emergency. Most importantly, this model works. Under the proposed distribution model, an estimated 84% of districts will be receiving funding based on a formula. And with that, I would like to turn the presentation over to Mike Sobel, and he will continue on with his wealth of knowledge on the subject.
Thank you, Jared. What I want to go through today is a little more detail than what I talked about Monday when I was before you. And we're going to take a look at some preliminary data on results at a summarized level. The purpose of this being is when the simulations come out Friday, people will take a look at them and say, well, why did this district do this and why did this district do this? And what I'm going to try and lay out is some of what is causing that. Is what you will see in the movement, but also to show that as a whole, all of the work that we have done, the base cost, all of the subgroups, the distribution, we are coming out at the end with an allocation of money that actually makes sense. And it makes sense in a rational way and a consistent way. We've seen the data here before. I will not belabor that. One thing I do want to caution both you and our districts and our colleagues when they look at this is right now in the simulations, there are some estimated values for 2018 and 19. These may change once there's actual values that will not be known until between now and the start of the next fiscal year. So just a note of caution as we look at the printouts. So there are 5 general factors that are influencing what's happening in the current distribution and formula compared to the formula as it exists right now. Some of those factors may be offsetting for districts, and Steve kind of talked about that in his presentation, and you'll see an illustration of that. The 3 things that will tend to make districts do better than others. One is that remember we went through base costs on Monday, there were a lot of minimums in there. Those minimums will drive additional resources. And so districts that are very small, low enrollments, will do a little bit better. Part of that is recognizing they don't reach the economies of scale that bigger districts do to provide certain services. Second is districts that are currently capped. They're currently capped. The formula is saying they should be getting something above what they're actually getting. When you have a rational formula with no caps, those districts will tend to do better. And the third one, and I've had a little trouble trying to explain this, I will take another shot at this, is when you look at capacity quintiles, which is what we're going to look at. Quintiles meaning they're broken into 5 groups on their capacity, about 120, 122 districts in each group. If you look at the current allocations of money under the current formula within quintile groups, some districts do better and some districts do worse. And generally, the ones that are doing worse now in the same quintile will probably end up doing a little bit better, because what's causing them to do worse are all the idiosyncrasies and the quirks in the current formula. The two things that will generally look when districts may end up on a guarantee or close to the guarantee, not getting much increase, the two main drivers of this are, one, that there's a very large difference between their enrollment and their formula ADM under the current proposal. And again, Steve kind of addressed this with Whitehall, where there is a lot of students leaving the district. The second that we found is actually about a quarter of the districts, a little over a quarter of the districts in the last 2 years have gotten very sharp increases in public utility values, primarily from pipeline, a little bit from a couple gas-fired power plants. Those different districts have gotten significantly wealthier. And so that affects their capacity. And so with the guarantees, that will cause them to stay on the guarantee because they're generating a lot more revenue locally than they have been in the past. So the first thing I want to do, this is actually gets at the issues with the current formula. What you're seeing in this chart are the 3rd through the 11th lowest capacity districts in the state. And this is using the targeted assistance capacity measure or wealth measure that exists right now. The nice thing about that is that it treats every district the same. We can't use the state share index because every districts are having different components. In every district, the capacity, wealth capacity for targeted assistance is 50% property and 50% income. So it somewhat mirrors what we're doing right now. And if you take a look at this, especially a couple examples, if you look at Whitehall and you look at Campbell that are right next to each other, both are inner ring suburban districts. They have almost identical capacities. There's a $60 difference in their capacity, and yet Campbell is getting $5,300 per pupil more than Whitehall is getting under the current formula. And if you go down to the bottom, the 11th poorest down there, Maple Heights, and you look at what Maple Heights is getting compared to some of the others, it is a significant difference. And you're seeing this, if we look through the whole range of districts, you're going to see this going on in every different quintile among districts, where you have districts that are similar in composition, and there are very sharp differences in what one district is getting versus another. This is part of what we are trying to solve and trying to address with the new system and the new distribution system. If we take a look, again, in capacity quintiles, using the targeted assistance quintile, these are what the simulations are showing us at the end of fiscal 21, so at the end of this biennium. This is what the allocation of dollars per pupil will look like in aggregate in the 5 quintiles. In the lowest capacity quintile, roughly 120, 121 lowest capacity districts, on average they will be getting about $8,800 in aid from the state. This is just the state share of aid, is what they will be getting. In the highest capacity, the wealthiest 120, 122 districts, they will be getting about $2,600 per pupil from the state, about a 3.5 times difference between the poorest and the wealthiest. And you can see the progression. It's not even, and it actually makes sense that the lowest capacity on average is going to get about $2,000 more per pupil than the second lowest. And the wealthiest group, and to be fair, I'm in the wealthiest group and I'm fine with this, is the wealthiest group of districts is getting more than $2,000 a pupil less than the next wealthiest. And so it is a logical outcome. When you take a look at this is a second issue, and this is getting at what's causing some of the differences. And this is, again, a kind of a hard thing to describe, is what you're looking at in the middle column of this are districts who, under the simulations, are ending up on the guarantee. And it's looking at their current funding from the state. So if you look in that lowest quintile, the current districts that are ending up on the guarantee under the new formula are getting almost $10,400 on average per pupil. In the bottom quintile, the ones who are going to be gaining revenue under the new formula only get about $7,750 per pupil. And so the districts that are intending to more on a guarantee, as I explained earlier, are getting more money now than the ones not, and that relationship holds in all 5 quintiles. It's most stark in the top one, but there is a significant difference in the other 4 quintiles as well. Finally, looking at the estimated average increases over the upcoming biennium in the lowest, in the 5 quintiles, the one thing you see, again, that it is indicative that this is doing the right thing is the smallest dollar increases are in the highest capacity school districts. They're getting money, and there are districts in the high capacity that are getting money, but in the other 4 quintiles, they are getting more. And they're fairly similar amounts in each of the other 4 quintiles. But again, this is a logical outcome to what distribution should be doing. It is sending the money where the need is the greatest and the capacity to raise funds locally is the least. And so we think it is giving the right outcomes. There will be individual districts, as you were looking at them, that may fall into one category versus another. But what I'm hoping is that this framework kind of explains, okay, what are the conditions in such and such a district that is causing them to get more money or not get more money, and you can see the rationale and the reasoning for, what it's not necessarily, and I will tell you, it's not a flaw in the new system. It is mostly a flaw in the current system that is causing these changes, and and so when you have a new system in place that's rational, you're getting what we believe are rational results. So with that, let me turn it back over to Mike to wrap up, and then we'll be happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mike. We would like to conclude our testimony with a final thought. Ohio has long needed a rational, transparent, comprehensive, and most of all, fair system for funding its schools. Unfortunately, Ohio's current school funding formula is not working. In fact, 4 out of 5 districts, 82%, are now funded off the formula with a cap limiting funding or a guarantee underpinning it. This is because our school funding formula and system is not based on the actual needs of our students, schools, and communities. We believe that the distribution model proposed under the Fair Funding Plan provides a strong mechanism for achieving this vision for Ohio's schools, and most importantly, for Ohio's nearly 1.9 million students. Co-Chairman Cupp and Patterson, members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity to offer testimony on the proposed fair funding model for Ohio's schools. We stand ready to address questions from the committee at the pleasure of the chairman.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Questions from the committee? Representative Blessing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had a couple questions. 2 are related, 1 isn't. The first one is, and I know we're dealing with estimates here, so I know you can't give me hard numbers, but was it the goal in coming up with this new formula to say for fiscal year 20 and 21 that no school district would receive less money than it did in fiscal year 19?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Blessing, that's correct, yes.
Very good. Follow up? Yes, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next question is, and I only bring this up because I watched in the full Finance Committee some things that tend to give members heartburn. Just looking at Medicaid, for example, and our state share of what we spend on Medicaid because of reductions in federal funding through CHIP and the Group 8 expansion population resulted in, I think, the increase, there's an increase of like 10% there, which immediately generated a bunch of questions from members. For the purposes of education, it's about $8.4 billion that we spend for the executive proposal, fiscal year 20 and 21. How much of an increase are we talking overall with this? And I know we'll probably find out Friday, but I'm just pointing out that that's probably the big question at this
I
point.
believe I will defer to the co-chair to answer that question.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Oh.
Well, thank you for that. No further questions.
Other questions? Just a closing comment, and I know we've missed our hard stop, but we're close enough. I want to make sure I understand this fully. On one side of the equation of this fair funding model is the cost of what it costs to educate a student, correct?
That's correct.
On the other side of this fair funding model is what a local district's ability, its share of the cost, ability to pay based on property wealth and income. And with respect to the income, there are two different measures, the average income and the median based on the FAGI, correct?
That is correct, Mr. Chairman.
So that is fair for the local taxpayers, fair for the students, fair for the taxpayers. And then, as I understand it from your presentation, the state makes up the difference between the cost of the education and what is fair. So would you say, gentlemen, that this is also fair to the state of Ohio?
Mr. Chairman, we believe that it is. We believe that it is designing a formula that is a proper formula for educating our students, that is fair for we believe it is fair for everybody, yes.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Sort of.
Representative Blessing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is one I hear from some of the local folks that complain about tax abatements, and you know, you lose money locally, and I understand why local governments do that. But since there's property tax or property valuation is involved in the local share, do local school districts sort of get a double whammy in that, you know, they lose money through the tax abatements locally, but they could potentially lose it through this funding formula as well?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Blessing, that's actually not quite the case. That abated property is not in their taxable valuation.
Okay.
And
okay.
so, no, they do not get a double whammy where the formula pretends they have that valuation, but they don't really. So, no, that will not occur.
Very good. Thank you.
Further questions for our witnesses? Seeing none, the business of the committee is complete for today. We are adjourned.